When the woman lied about Emmett Till and caused him to get killed, the truth came out like this year. I was so angry, upset, and shocked. That's like, if you look at his murder, Tamir Rice's murder, Michael Brown's, when the truth comes out, years go by. And the truth finally comes out, and it's just outrageous, because this was a pivotal thing that I learned in school when I was a kid about the murder of Emmett Till. And to find out that that person is still alive and not being prosecuted for a false claim that destroyed this boy and his family's life. So this was something I did in my sketchbook. That's his uncle when his uncle was testifying that he saw those men who killed him. And that's something more recently I was working on. This is my response to the political person Tommy Lahren, who I'm like, oh my God, she's no different than the girl that was screaming during the integration of schools years ago. But why grabbing by the pussy isn't a deal breaker? I'm gonna wonder that for the next 30 years, why that was not a deal breaker, hearing a person say something like that. We can go on to the next one. This is about his cabinet picks and some of the stuff that's going on right now in Alabama. They just recently allowed that school district, that white district, to just segregate themselves away from the school. And that Superior Court judge just allowed that, so it's going to start bringing that de facto segregation back. So I started reimagining it with some of the articles and creating collages on top of it. So I did this with this Klansman here. And again, these are things that I put in my sketchbooks. This is watercolor from my brother Sean. This is 2 different shots of an area called Hogan's Pond out in Milton. We used to go there and play. The pictures from earlier of me holding the Mr. Spock action figure was near Hogan's Pond. And my brother's really, really sick right now. He's had some serious health issues. I tend to do some drawings just when I'm thinking about him and stuff like that. So I started to get back into watercolor painting. And this was another one, just me experimenting in between classes and stuff like that in terms of composition and things like that. So I wanted to include that because, you know, everything isn't about politics for me. Sometimes you gotta take a break. So you have to move on to some other things. This was one I did in my sketchbook dealing with what happened in France, where they anally raped this black man using a nightclub, but yet for some reason the cops said he fell on it while they were beating him up. And they're like, hey, he slipped. And yet this guy's whole insides were destroyed. So it's about how intersectionality in your struggles and mine. So I have this person here who's someone I know, a friend of mine who I know, who I was like, don't you think your struggles are similar to mine or ours or similar? We may have different genders, different race, but our struggles are similar in a lot of ways, particularly when it comes to violence from the state. We can move on to the next one. These are notes in my lesson book that I always have to remember or remind myself when I teach my students. Modifiers for my artwork: add, combine, distort, divide, energize, keep making art. Remind myself, why do I make art? My major steps are painting, but also a reminder of elements and principles of design. I always have to keep telling myself that, because if I talk to my students, I need to know the language. And even though it's been over 20 years, sometimes I forget stuff. So I'm like, you gotta keep reminding, because I'm getting older, so I sometimes will forget stuff. So that's what I do. And I'm a big fan of Rodin. So a lot of times I reference Rodin in my things. This was during the XL pipeline. I grew up remembering a TV show called The Lone Ranger, and I remember asking the hard question, excuse my language, where the fuck are you, masked man, considering he's supposed to have represented justice in the Old West and all these other things. And I'm thinking to myself, just symbolically, look at what was happening at Standing Rock, or at the Keystone Pipelines and all these other things that are violating Native American land rights. So, and my anger and my frustration at Senator McCain and a number of people who continually say, that's wrong, we shouldn't do that, that's horrible, and yet vote that way anyways. The hypocrisy is just devastating. So this was one of my sketchbook pages here. Move on. This was a guy who I drew and asked the question. He was a veteran, and I asked the question, what now, Trump voters? The real supporters, because the class warfare thing is on. It is on in ways that it's going to probably take a generation to try and fix some of the decisions that are being made. If you don't believe me, check out what's going on with healthcare. And I'm going to try my best not to start proselytizing during presentations, but now look back a little bit. But I did this on charcoal pastel papers. This was a guy who had his dog with him and hangs out not that far from Congress Square. So we just had a conversation about certain things, and it started to come out about certain things, and that's because he saw me drawing something else entirely. This is one of my lesson plan books. In it, sketch of Ruby Bridges, little girl integrated the schools years ago. And sometimes I have to remind myself, why did I get into this teaching? And why is it so important to me? And I think about young kids, no matter what color they are, but that everyone has a right to a good education. So I do my best to try to provide that. And I can speak for my colleagues and say they do the same. So what you see here is some of my reminders, staff meeting today, games I love, stuff like that. Reminders about things like that. So always if I'm not doing lessons, I'll start, if I have extra space, I'm like, oh, I can write this down or draw this out. This was Shea Evans when she spoke out at a Black Lives Matter protest. The cops ran up on her and arrested her. And I remember thinking about that Wonder Woman is a great fictional character, but we have real Wonder Women that are out there, who are in the front lines that the media often ignores, who make a stand, and that's bold. They may not have a magic lasso, but they have a magic spirit inside them. Holy Christ, I should write that. That was deep. So you can move on to the next one. These are the last couple ones. Again, my sketchbook, if it gets too tough, I'll start to just remember stuff from my childhood, stuff like that I enjoyed. I have a number of sketchbooks in my classroom in a closet that's open to all my students. And all of them deal with issues like Native Americans, heroic women, hands and feet, how to draw hands and feet, landscapes, still lifes. I even have a sketchbook in there called I Can't Draw. And it's for the creatively challenged person. All those sketchbooks over the last 16 years, 17 years, I've had students from Lincoln Sudbury, but also the kids I teach at College Academy in Winchester draw. I don't care about the age, I don't care if it's adult or kids. And I always say, oh, just go in there and just draw what you want. Some kids, like Maddie Hayden, drew Batman right there, which made me draw Robin, and then I'll start adding some other things around it. A kid drew the Batmite character up there. And it doesn't bother me at all if I have a drawing and some kids do stuff around it. I welcome it. So I figure, what I always tell people is when I retire, I'm going to read them or look through them. I very seldom ever look through the books, particularly the stuff when kids write, oh, Mr. Justice, this is, I said, I don't want to read until I'm gone. That's something to look forward to. It would be great. It would be a nice feeling to know it was all worth it. Or to be reminded it's all worth it. So I wanted to end on a more positive note about it, to just say, anytime people are in the school, or come by B237, my classroom, I want to check them out. Some amazing, amazing work from students. Some of those same students are in this room right now. So, yeah, Katie Whalen, I'm pointing at you. Leah Berger, I'm pointing at you. So, that is that pretty much, I think that is it. So that is essentially my entire presentation. I am here for any questions people may have, but otherwise, thank you. You've been very patient. I really appreciate it. Oh, question. That's a question, sure.
Why a scroll? I mean, when you started the project, did you pull out a big roll of paper and say, I'm just going to finish this whole roll of paper? Okay. As opposed to books or sheets of paper?
When I went to Boston University, my teacher, this is a situation, when you kids go to college, you'll see this too. They make you buy stuff that you don't need. I had a teacher who made me buy some, and then I just never used them. And at some point, when I was at home and I was looking for how can I take notes, I saw one, started doing it, and then I filled it, and I was like, oh, I'm done. Then I did the other one, and then I went to the store and I bought them, and I ended up doing about 8, each one about 60 feet in length. This last one, about 2007, a friend of mine's found it, not even a friend, this is an associate, art associate, found it at this warehouse, and it's like this big. So I was like, he was like, oh, I know you still wear this roll, you can have this. I said, sure, I'll take it. And he was like, yeah, $30. I said, this will be the best investment I ever made. And I've worked on that one since. So concurrently, if I line them all up, like I said, the length is like devastating. And I like the concept of, walk a mile in my shoes, physically walk a mile in my views. If I were to display, ideally, and when I was in graduate school, my professors were like, one of my professors was like, no museum will take you. I said ideally, I want it here all the way as long as it can go. And anyone who wants to read it has to physically engage it. Now there's an artist named Crystal who's done a lot of stuff, messing with nature and doing stuff like that. So I remember in graduate school when I had to defend it in my crit groups, I was like, I'm not gonna apologize and say, oh, I gotta cut it because I'm worried about what other people think. I'm more concerned with this process of my life, this process of my thought process over the course of years. So for me, yeah, however long it takes is however long it takes. When I display it, we'll let the museums figure it out. For me, that's what I know. Ideally, just straight ahead. Something that forces you physically to engage it, and are you willing to do that? Not just physically, but intellectually. Some of the things I'm writing about are aggressive. So that's how it became that. Yes?
I could ask you this at work too, but I know you have that video clip where you can sort of go through it at real time.
Mm-hmm.
How much of your scroll have you photographed in that way?
Lee Weinstein, who's a good friend of mine, photographed that for my graduate thesis. And it's an hour and a half, and that's about 100 feet, almost 200 feet. So Lee Weinstein, he's an inventor. He invented laser tag, a good friend of mine. Took several photos of it, and that took us like almost 6 hours. In a situation that's like the length of this table, he photographed every single individual section that he could. And then he created this program that stitched it all together. And then he made it into a loop, so it's like a video where you just see it move like this. It's on YouTube, too. You look up Shea Justice, all